Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I'm Hari, and I'll be moderating the talk for this evening. To set a little bit of context for the talk, I'm sure you all would have noticed a small logo on top called the Salegaon Balka on the poster. Salegaon Balka is actually Heta's Balka in Salegaon, where a great deal of us have learned a lot about heritage over the last 1 year. And we thought we've had a lot of conversation about heritage and we always have open-ended discussions there. So we figured we should also take this space outside of Saliga and involve more people doing similar work and get them involved in these conversations. Before we start, I'd also like to thank the team that helped us put this book together over 2 years, all the homeowners who trusted us and opened up their homes to us, the team here at Cymroza that was very happy to have us here, Meher and Fiona who were very willing to be part of this evening, and Dr. Pheroza Godrej who will be releasing the book. I am going to quickly introduce Dr. Pheroza. Dr. Pheroza J Godrej is an art historian and a PhD in ancient Indian culture. She founded the Cymroza Art Gallery and authored various publications and curated highly acclaimed exhibitions for leading national and international museums. She is chairperson of the Museum Society of Mumbai, former president of the National Society of the Friends of Trees for 17 years, president emeritus since 2016. Dr. Godrej is trustee of Dr. Bhavdaji Lad Museum, Impact India Foundation, and the Sea Cadet Corps India, director of Asia Society India Center, and on the advisory executive board of the Ashoka Trust for Research in Ecology, ATRI, and the Meli Mehta Music Foundation. The Asiatic Society of Mumbai conferred her with the Society's honorary fellowship for her outstanding contribution in the field of art and culture. Dr. Godrej is the chairperson of Godrej Archives Council and advisor and Godrej Mangrove Cell. And Dr. Pheroza, could we please have you up in front? I'd also like to have Heta Pandit, who's the author of Stories from Goan Houses, Fiona Fernandez, and Meher Marfatia up in front for releasing the book. You should come. With the both of you as well. Yes. You can have a seat here. Sit. Oh, for a picture? Okay. Okay, we'll do it later. I'm going to quickly introduce the speakers we have with us today. Dr. Heta Pandit's first real job was with famed ethologist Dr. Jane Goodall on a chimpanzee research station in Tanzania, East Africa. On her return to India in 1981, Heta volunteered with Bombay Environmental Action Group and initiated several heritage preservation projects through the Indian Heritage Society, Bombay chapter. Traumatized by the riots in 1993 in her beloved Bombay, she left the city for Munnar at first and then Goa, putting all her energies into preservation of Goan houses. She has written 11 books on Goan heritage, Houses of Goa, Hidden Hands, Master Builders of Goa, Dust and Other Short Stories from Goa, Walking in Goa, Walking in Old Goa, and Walking with Angels. There's More to Life Than a House in Goa, Grinding Stories, Songs from Goa, Grinding Stories Retold, and Stories from Goan Houses. Heta is a Homi Baba Fellow and a founder member of the Goa Heritage Action Group. She is currently working on a book titled Objects and Memories from Goa. She lives in Saliga with her dogs Goru and Potio and a cat named Ginger. Could we have a round of applause for Heta, please? Next up is Fiona. Fiona is a chronicler at heart with a time traveler's soul. As associate editor at Midday and through her outspoken protagonist, Sir P.M. Feroz Mehta and Lady Flora Fountain, in her weekly column Bombay Nama. Fiona highlights issues around Mumbai's multi-layered histories and communities, the conservation of its UNESCO World Heritage Sites and its citizen champions. In H for Heritage, Mumbai, Fiona's third book, she explores the city's historic treasures, both individuals and landmarks, using the letters of the alphabet. Written for the young, with a nudge to the older reader as well, her wanderings across the other city, including its decrepit buildings, nondescript gullies, and charming neighborhoods, have unearthed forgotten stories and rebuilt its connections to where it all began. Stints, uh, Stints at Cadbury Bonvita quiz contest and Disney adventures exposed her to the sensibilities of young minds, enabling a sharper focus for this book. Fiona has also written Bombay Meri Jaan and 10 Heritage Walks of Mumbai. She was co-researcher for the Mumbai Fact File, while her writings have appeared in anthologies like Urban Voice 3 and The Book of Dog. When she isn't writing or strolling about Sobo's streetcapes, Fiona prefers watching reruns of Wimbledon finals, attempting online quizzes, or having a thought bubble conversation with a friendly stray. Can we have a round of applause for Fiona? We have Meher with us. Meher is a freelance journalist and independent publisher. With a master's degree in English literature, she worked as assistant editor of the Illustrated Weekly of India and text editor for Marg Publications, Art India, and Verve magazines, besides writing for the Indian Express, Times of India, Midday, Mumbai Mirror, and The Swaddle, among others. Her publishing imprint, 4950 Books, focuses on little known aspects of fast vanishing communities and cultures. Its first title in 2011 was Laughter in the House, 20th Century Parsi Theatre. Her recent book, Once Upon a City, is a rich compilation of expanded essay versions of her popular Sunday midday column. A big believer in the power of oral history, Meher's passion for Bombay sees her engage extensively with its locals, documenting their lives in deep detail. After all, the stories people tell hold the key to understand the past and appreciate the present, to better shape the future of a city truly deserving attention and care. Can we have a round of applause for Meher? I'm going to start with, yes, Dr. Pheroza would like, Dr. Pheroza will say a few words.
It's just a few words because I think I need to welcome everyone here today on behalf of the Museum Society of Bombay and the Cymroza Art Gallery, who are co-hosting this event. We're delighted to see so many members and friends of Heta, friends of the museum, and friends of the gallery here today. I have known these three ladies, I was trying to think, 4 decades, 3 decades, and maybe 2 decades, and Hari this evening. So it gives me immense pleasure to welcome friends back here. I'm not going to rattle off all the names we're going to hear, but they're like lyrical poetry. Kandolim, Siolim, it goes on and on and on. So I'm looking forward very much to hearing this lecture, and on behalf of all of us and the two organizing bodies, I would like to thank you. At the beginning, it's not a vote of thanks, it's a thank you. Hari will do the wrapping up at the end. So welcome, and on behalf of all of us, with great appreciation.
Thank you so much for having us, Dr. Pheroza. Thank you, thank you. I'd like to start with asking all three of you all the same question. All of you all wrote extensively for columns, newspapers, and magazines. At what point did you all think all of this had to go into a book? And what did you all want your readers to experience and feel by reading your books? Heta, would you like to go
Should I
first?
go first? I started writing fiction in Goa for the Navhind Times, which is our local paper, and for Goa Today, which is our monthly magazine. And it was not something I thought I would do ever. So that's when I used to go to, say, a bank and stand in a line and listen to eavesdrop on other people speaking, it gave me ideas for stories. And that's how I started writing fiction. And one day, one of the editors said, "Why don't you put it all in a book?" And that's how Dust and Other Short Stories was born, really. So these are stories where the germ began when I was listening in on other people's stories. I don't know about you, Meher, how you collected your stories.
So actually, I owe it to my kids, my interest in Bombay and getting little known stories about the city out for people in general. Because when I was a mother in the 90s, my kids were very little. And I was a little fed up of hearing everyone say, you know, Bombay is so boring for kids. Where do you take kids? And everyone was catching planes to every other part of the world. And I just felt, no, why am I not feeling restless and bored? And so I decided to share that in a column, which Tariq Ansari was kind enough to give me at midday at the time. And he made me do a book called Little Mumbai, which is everything to do that's interesting and different for children in Bombay. After that, I did a column called Kid Day in Midday for very many years. And then I found that so many adults were coming to me and saying they didn't know this, that, and the other. Of course, I was finding out myself. It's not that I knew most of it myself until I decided to find out. So that became columns for people, not just kids, you know, every kind of reader. And why the midday column Once Upon a City finally became a book is because typically after every Sunday piece, a lot of people mail me with their impressions, their memories, their information, and it's too precious for it to just lie in my inbox. That needs to be shared. So I created expanded essay versions of each column, and that became the book. So that's how the column started and shaped into a book. And the column continues thanks to a paper like Midday. It is our only city paper left, and I think it's doing a marvelous job. We should really just all support it and celebrate the way it celebrates the city.
Fiona is also a midday girl. By the way, all three of us are midday girls. I used to do a column called Bombay Walkabout in the 80s when I lived here. And then Meher and Fiona are both midday girls. So we were very keen that the editor join us today. Unfortunately, she couldn't make it. But I'm sure we'll do something together with Midday to celebrate this whole union of minds. Fiona.
Thank you, Heta, for the kind words for Midday. So, my interaction, or rather, my understanding of heritage began when I was working on a fact book that the quiz master Derek O'Brien at that point, he used to also write a lot of quiz books, fact books, and I was commissioned to do a book on Bombay. And that's the first time I actually stepped into the Asiatic Society Library, and I was hooked on forever since then. I wanted to write books on my own about heritage. I felt that all of this was not told to us, explained to us when we were studying in school, or even if it was done in very fleeting examples. So I was very clear I had to write a book on heritage. So the book on heritage walks happened. And many years later, I felt that in course of my time working at Midday, I felt the children were missing out in the same way that Meher mentioned about not knowing about places in the city. I think with children, we are sitting on a generation, upcoming generations, who definitely need to know more about our city because they are our only hope. And that's why I was very clear that the next book, which is expected in the end of March, it had to be focused on children, but also for older people who want to know more about the city. And my column, that is something again where I wanted to sort of make heritage a bit less intimidating, because all of us have this, not me personally, I loved history in school, but a majority of people tend to get very intimidated when it comes to history and heritage. And I wanted to kind of break it down, decode it, make it simpler. So even the column where I have these two talking statues, Sir PM, that is Sir Firoza Mehta, and Lady Flora, that's Flora Fountain, and they basically discuss what's happening in the city, what they like, what they don't like, but they don't hold back. So I think it's important for people to keep the dialogue going as far as heritage is concerned, because that's a small way to ensure that people stay aware about it. So yeah, that's.
Thank you, Fiona.
Hari,
Yeah.
let me add to what Fiona's just said. I gifted Meher's book to a friend in Goa, and he said to me, "Oh, if I had read this book and I had Meher as my teacher, I would have studied history."
I'm also really curious to know. All three of you all write so much, and it's not something you can do solo. You'll constantly have to talk to people, be in the middle of people. From the time you all started to about now, how has it changed? How you all interact with people and how people respond to you all?
When I first worked on my book, Houses of Goa, way back in 1998, nobody knew us. It was a first for me, it was a first for my designer Rukshana Sarosh, it was a first for our photographer Ashok Koshi, it was a first for our publisher Gerard Dacunia, who ran a company called Architecture Autonomous. In fact, the book was released in this very hall in 1998. So big round of applause for Cymroza. And thank you. And nobody knew us. Besides, nobody knew what went into a book. So we used to knock on doors and completely cold call. And we used to say that, I used to say, we're working on this book, and would you mind if we took pictures and all that? And there was a lady sitting on a planter's chair out in the veranda. I'll never forget this. And I said, we're working on this book. And she said, where's the book? So, it's just shows how little people knew about what went into a book. That there was a photographer, there was research, there were interviews, there was, first draft, second draft. None of that made any sense to this lady. And another story I will never forget is, and Gerard knows this story, is we went to a house in Kandolim, knocked on the door, again a cold call, and I said, we're doing this book, and can we take pictures of your house? Only the exterior, we have no interest in going in. But we were polishing our halo every morning and saying we must ask for permission before we take photos. So this gentleman opened the door just a chink, only that much, and he said, no, and slammed the door shut. So me being, like a dog with a bone, knocked again. And I said, but we've come from a good reference. We are doing the book for Gerard Dacunia. And he opened the door wide and he said, in that case, not at all. This is the kind of response we got when we first started out. We've come a long way since then. It's been, over 22 years. And I think we've all come a long way. Meher, you want to share some experience?
So yes, lots of slam doors in the beginning, but cold calling is the only way you can go. I've chosen not to be on social media, because if you put out that you want, such and such, you ask for something, you'll get the standard responses. If everyone knows, then what am I putting out, right? So I've decided to just do my own research, and that's what I put out on Sundays. So earlier, cold calling it was misery. You had to build people's trust. You had to keep going back and forth. And I typically walked the street or junction that I'm profiling at least 3 or 4 times that particular week. It's exhausting, but the loveliest stories come out of where they're least expected. If you just keep a very open mind and shed all ego and just go forward, because you do have some amazing stories waiting to be told. They just have to be extracted. So after the first year of my column, it got a lot easier. That was about 8 years ago. It got a lot easier because now I have people saying, "Hamari gali mein kab aaya karoge aap?" So that's really warm, that's inviting. And I just feel, and I'm sure you both agree, that it's a question of letting people know that you're no investigative journalist. It's oral history you're after, and people like talking about themselves basically. So if you just, it's a question of winning trust and uh, making them know, letting them know that you appreciate their time and trust, and then everything opens. It's lots easier now for me. Fiona?
I've had a slightly different I mean, I've received slightly different feedback simply because the media today
Not phones.
yeah. So it was actually tough for the first book. That's for the first two books. That's the Bombay Mary Jaan quiz book and the 10 Heritage Walks, because I was uh, still sort of finding my way in the heritage community and also as a newspaper journalist. So lots of questions, libraries telling me to return with an official letter and things like that. So they made it a little difficult for me, and same policy, you just return and you persist. I think that's and then they somewhere see that conviction, they see that dedication, and I think that sort of made it useful. Uh, the last 10 years, I'd say, has been good, but now things are again, people are far more suspicious about the media. Like Meher rightly said, we are not investigative journalists. We want to just hear your stories, because there are so many stories out there which are not even being documented the way Heta has or Meher has in their books. And it takes a lot of convincing people. Very often for me, because I'm a newspaper journalist, I don't have the luxury of time. So yeah, I have to do whatever I can in that 1 hour that a person is ready to give me. But yes, I'd say now it's getting a little difficult because people are far more suspicious about the media as a whole, and everyone's painted with the same brush. So it is it's not easy, but we won't give up.
Thank you, Fiona. I'd like to also point out that all of them have been so forthcoming with their resources. They made it easier for the current generation starting out. Heta's made all her resources available to us, and we've been going to all these houses. And I don't think we'll ever have to struggle because we're already in there. We already have access. I'd also like to ask, have you ever gone back to one of the places you've covered before or stories that you've covered earlier, a few years later, and have you seen changes there?
Sorry. All the time, and it breaks your heart, but then this is Bombay. So sometimes I just revisit, because very often, no, most often, my interviewees are senior citizens, right? And some of them are particularly lonely. Most of them are. So once in a while, if I am passing by, I just go up to say a hello. Not that much time, just a hello. It just needs 5 minutes. They just like to see you. And I can't find them. I can't find the building. It's happened between, within 6 to 8 weeks sometimes. But this is Bombay, right? So property, it's just the redevelopment is rampant. It's crazily rampant. And as Fiona said, the reason I feel there's growing suspicion again now is there's a lot of dispute with old homes, and I'm always visiting old homes. I rarely go to buildings that have lifts and things. So by the time you get to the top floor, lots of doors have opened, and I think like, what is she coming prying? And we don't want to get into any trouble with our redeveloper, with our builder. So it's really, really sad. You can't even visit someone just to say hello, just for a little bit of companionship, without people getting worried about what it could imply. And that is really, really unfortunate.
My experience in Goa working on this book, Stories from Goan Houses, has been a little different from yours, Meher. In the sense that there were house owners, of course, there are up to from 30 to 300 custodians in some of these houses. But yeah, but the thing is that the most of the house owners that we met, they wanted to give their children something to look forward to. And they invited us into their homes and they said, you know, my son is in America, we only come for Ganesh. Please do something that we can make them proud of. So, and a lot of our young people who are living in these houses, very proud of their homes. So that is, it's a slightly different texture that we experience.
Heta, could you also tell us about Mr. Sandeep Kundaikar?
Yeah, there was one of the houses we've covered in this book is belongs to a Kundaikar family. And I met Sandeep Kundaikar when he was a 25-year-old, I think. And I went to see the house. It was in complete shambles. The chandeliers were like falling apart. The house was falling apart. Absolutely exquisite paintings on the walls. And nobody was looking after that house. They were very proud of their history, their family history, but nobody had the wherewithal or the money to put back into this house. And I remember Sandeep was sitting with his, you know, wearing a pair of jeans, a check shirt, and twiddling his thumbs and saying, now, when is this woman going to leave us alone kind of attitude, you know. 22 years later, Sandeep opened his home to us and we were stunned. I was stunned because I had seen the house in that state so many years ago. He was celebrating the wedding of his nephew. House was completely done up. He had invited a conservation architect, Ketak Nashnolkar, to restore the house. They had pooled in the money and he had opened it up, and the house is, you'll see it in the book, is absolutely stunning now. So we've seen that kind of change also, and that kind of family pride as well.
Thank you, Heta. And I'm going to bring up something you pointed out earlier. After we asked Meher and Fiona to join us for this evening, tomorrow we're also doing a talk with Jane Borges. We realized all of them are midday girls. And I think this association goes all the way back to 80s with the Heta, and Meher, Fiona, and Jane still continuing their association. Could you tell us what it's like to have such strong support with a publisher who's constantly encouraging you all?
So my association with Midday actually started when I was in college, and I would take the crossword. I would try to crack it on my way to college. Years later, when I was working with the quiz company that Derek O'Brien had set up, we had a section called chalomumbai.com. And that's where all the quiz questions would be sent out to people in Bombay. His office was in Calcutta, and there I was sitting writing questions about Bombay to people in Midday. So that was quite fun and almost like a 6 degrees of separation connection. Years later, when there was an opening at Midday and I applied, and yeah, the whole thing started again. 14 years now, so it's been quite enriching, quite engaging, and hats off to editors like Tinaz Nushian, who's not here right now, who also gives the paper space for heritage, for people's stories, for community stories, because that's what Bombay is, right? I mean, I keep saying Bombay rather than Mumbai, and I think that's something that all of us are used to. We can't think of it the other way, but it's also very important to explain the difference to people who are using the word Mumbai now more often, especially again the younger generation. So yeah, Midday has been very, very close to me. It's been very lucky for me, and I think if people need a voice in the city, then that's the paper that one should read. Over to Meher. I think Meher has had an even longer association.
Yeah, but even if the management, though the management has changed, the the support that they've given to heritage stories hasn't changed. So that is what, it's a bit of a interesting fact.
The heads of departments, whether they are sports, whether they are city crime, they all are inherently Bombay people. So it kind of they bring it to the table, So when we have our edit meetings, it's all about someone telling you about some dabbawala who's having an issue. He may not even be the city editor. He could be the photo editor, but there's so much of organic, seamless cross pollination, so to speak, when it comes to ideas, and everyone just loves the city that much. So I think that flows through in the pages of the newspaper, and that's why.
Is love. Whether it's you're in Goa or you're in Bombay, if you love your city, you love the state, you love the home you were brought up in, you will find a way to do something to contribute to the city. And I always say, when I speak to school students or college student, young adults, always tell them it's not only, first question is, where do you get your stories from? And they say, oh, grandma. No, only grandmas don't have, they're not the only custodians of stories. I said, even you have a story. What if you go to somebody's house? What do you see? You see the articles, you see the artifacts. Every artifact collected by this friend's mom or dad or grandma or grandpa has a story. So there's a story in everything, and that gets them interested in their own family histories and so on. So that's one way of getting our young adults interested in collecting stories.
Actually, this question is for Heta and Fiona because you're also involved in walking tours. What has response been? I know a lot of people come out to walking tours. What was it like a few years ago, and what's the response been like now?
So back in 2007, when I wrote 10 Heritage Walks of Bombay, uh, I didn't realize it would still be on bookshelves till today. And I think that's the biggest achievement. And I'm not just saying it because I wrote the book, but it stirred a lot of questions, debates. I kept getting queries, especially from people who are Bombay people. That's interesting, because they came up to me and said, "Oh, we didn't know about this place," or we didn't know that there was this little cottage here, etc. Coming to your question very specifically about walks. It had still not yet grown, the movement. I think it took a couple of years later. There was Sharda Dwivedi, who is, I mean, there is only one Sharda Dwivedi. So she had actually started this whole idea about walks with fort walks. I think that was one of the best research books till date on walks. Yeah, so the book that I wrote was again for people who may not have access to academic books, information, history. So I sort of decoded it, made it a little simpler. And yeah, I think that was what helped me. I kept getting a lot of requests, especially from younger people, college students who would get in touch with me via my publisher at that point. I want to mention my publisher at that point, that's Rupa and Company, Mr. R.K. Mehra, who is an amazing gentleman, and I have to give him credit for believing in an absolute rookie like me all those years ago. And he said, yeah, go for it, Fiona, write this book on heritage walks. And he did not interfere with a single part of the plotting, each walk. He never interfered at all. And I think that helped me also. So I just, went through places that were not otherwise written about. And over the years, the book continues to sell well. It's great, actually. I'm quite surprised, in fact. And it also stirred me to write this book, the next one, which is on its way. I also do walks for midday readers. We do it free of cost. It's basically like a service. We take a small group of readers. We did Sivri Cemetery, which I thought was quite fun also. Maybe not everyone thinks that a cemetery is the place to find stories, but my goodness, you'll be amazed with that place. So yeah, I think walks are important to mobilize the community. They're also important to take them to the source It's also a great primary source when it comes to documenting stories, which I also feel that is no longer done by a lot of people, primary source research. So I think Heritage Walks, the more people who do it in the city, nothing like it. But yes, it has to have a bit of an expert angle to it, because otherwise you're just walking around and you've lost that time, you've lost momentum. It's also important in a city like Bombay to move beyond the obvious places. So yes, South Bombay, Bandra, but I think other parts of the city also need to have their caretakers. We must document those, because in fact those are the parts. Bombay is a linear city, so those parts of the city are actually fast vanishing. They're vanishing faster than you can imagine. I'll give you an example of where I live. I live in the northern suburb of Mulund. And once upon a time, it had at least 5 single screen cinemas, and they all had wonderful art deco detailing. Throughout the pandemic and the lockdowns that ensued, in no time, all of them vanished. They've just been mowed down. High rises have come in its place. So I think it's really important to document that, to go for walks, and I feel walks is a great way of doing that. So people like Atul Kumar and Naina Katpalia with the Art Deco Trust Mumbai, they're doing that in some ways, and hats off to them. I mean, we need more of that in Bombay. So yeah.
My experience walking tours. 25 years ago, Jack, Ajit Sukija, and I decided we'll do walking tours. They'll be very popular. We'll even make some money for Goa Heritage Action Group. And guess how many people we had? In one whole year, 365 days, only 5 customers. It took us very, very long to get this idea across. Today, there are how many, 6 or 7 walking tour companies in Goa. And sometimes when they call their guests to the post office, the general post office in Panjim to meet, you often have to ask, which group are you with? There are some 20 walks happening every single day in Panjim. So we've come a long way, and I'm happy.
That's so lovely to hear. Meher and Fiona, I'd like to invite you to also start asking Heta questions about her new book, Stories from Goan Houses. To start off, Heta's first book was Houses of Goa, way back in 1998. It went into 5 reprints, and it was a landmark book in terms of conservation for homes. It still continued to be used as a reference book, and you went on to explore multiple genres with Goa, and you've come back to Houses of Goan Houses. Could you tell us the whole journey and what it's like, and why Stories from Goan Houses?
Actually, the first book was more architecture. Our publisher was an architect, and it was more about architecture. And over the years, after meeting people, getting responses from them, listening to the stories that they had to tell, I realized that architecture is nothing without the stories of the people that live in these houses. So this book is more about the people that live in these houses, their stories, what they've shared with us. And they've shared a lot more than I've put in the book, actually.
I just wanted to add to that, not a question, but just to tell you what I really appreciated about this book, Stories from Goan Houses. Everyone has this idea of Portuguese villas, Goan homes, and you have so wonderfully created the stories from Gaur Saraswat homes, the kind of sociological, little beautiful details, whether it is, sharing a recipe for saffron shira or dry masala mackerel, all the way to the old typewriters that belong to the family, all the way to, of course, the grinding stones. And of course, you have 2 beautiful books about the songs that the women sing around them. So I think that's great, because everyone reaches out for a book on Goan homes pretty much in a touristy way, like Goan homes, Portuguese villas, oh, have you bought one, or is this someone's ancestral one? And this is homes that have been there for 300 years, there was a sixth generation family I was seeing in one of your chapters. So I think that's great that you have included, you've opened it up. And were they, yeah, the question is, were they as forthcoming, the Gaud Saraswat community, as the Portuguese?
We want to give them something to look forward to. So why don't you do a book? Of course, he wanted one book on his family alone, but that may not have worked very well. So I did get interested in his house. He's got an absolutely stunning house with a sala or a ballroom that has French furniture. So it's like two houses in one. The back portion, the rear portion of the house is completely Indian. Wood-fired stove, a well that is only where you draw water only for the temple, cow dung flooring, and so on. And then the front of the house is completely European. And they even had a meat door. So the whole house was vegetarian most of the year. But yeah, but if they had they entertained Portuguese officials, for example, including the governor's wife visited their house. So what they would do is they would ask their munkas or tenants to prepare non-vegetarian dishes. So there was a meat door through which all these non-vegetarian dishes were brought in and served in china, crockery, and so on. Otherwise, you ate on a banana leaf every day or a thali. So it was completely like schizophrenic almost, you know. So that was the interesting. Then after I did Upendra's house, Upendra's wife Sangeeta said, you know, even I come from a very large old house, the Mamai Kamath house in Panjim. So we went there, and from there we learned that the Dempos, when they first arrived from Karnataka, they stayed in the Mamai Kamath house till their own house was being built, Casa Dempo in Panjim. So we moved to Casa Dempo. That's how one house led us to another, and that's how we collected all these stories.
Heta, as soon as we open the book, there's some really lovely artwork there. Where is the artwork from, and is there a story?
Okay. You want to open? When you see a house, any house, we tend to look at it full front. And yeah, this is from the Pai Riker house in a village, hold it up, Hari. Yeah. In a village called Savoy Bere. And 22 years ago, so both Kerkar, artist and owner of Museum of Goa, he had given me a very slim book called Art in Goan Homes, printed by the Ministry of Culture, Information and whatever department, not a single caption. No caption, no credits, no photographer's name, no artist's name, nothing. Where the house, where the painting was from, nothing. So we used to wonder, Subodh and I, where are these paintings, you know? And suddenly after 22 years, and Mangirish Pai Riker and Ramnath, we were old friends. But it's very, very rare for somebody to take you to their home in Goa. I mean, you could meet them in a club, you could meet them in a restaurant, cafe, and all that for years together, but you'll never be invited to their homes. And suddenly, Alinto Coelho, who's our colleague, and said he made contact with Mangirish, and Mangirish said, "Yeah, bring Heta over." And there they were, these drawings, these paintings on the walls that we had been looking for 22 years. When I told Subodh, he almost collapsed. He said, goodness. And these paintings, by the way, were done as, can you hold it up again, Hari? They were done because there were a lot of theater artists in this family, performing artists. In those days, men would play the role of women. Women were not, from good families, were not seen on stage. So what they used to do was, the theater artists would paint these on the walls as references for the actors. So if you played Shakuntala's role, for example, or if you played Damayanti, what was Damayanti looking like? How she would dress, how she would, what her posture was, what her graces were, what jewelry, how her hair, what sort of wig he should wear to portray this particular character. And they were all taken from Raja Ravi Verma's paintings.
Thank you, Heta. Meher and Fiona, do you have questions for Heta?
Heta, so there must have been a lot of learnings, of course, in course of this book. But what were the unlearnings? What were things that you possibly had to tweak in the head after this book happened?
I should share that. Yeah, I'll share this story. I won't mention the name of the house that I went to, but 22 years ago, I wasn't allowed into this house. My hair was not gray. And this, I'm saying this for a reason. I was in that menstrual age bracket. And I was not allowed inside the temple of this family. Now I realize it. So this was a learning for me. I didn't know why they wouldn't take me in. I was also a meat eating at that time. Now when I went there, Alinto said that they've asked you to come. So I said, wow, what's changed? And I was curious. Walk into the temple of the family, right in Sanctum Sanctorum. And the head priest came out and he said, are you a vegetarian today? I said, I'm a vegetarian anyway. Big beaming smile. Big smile. And then he said, where are you from? Now in Goa, when they ask you where you're from, you say you're Saligaon. But I was a bit smart and I said, I'm a Parsi from Bombay. And he said, oh, in that case, you're an Aryan. And he gave me the tirth, the sacred water, in my right hand. And I was accepted from that moment onwards. Anytime we went with Daniel, our photographer is here, Hari, you also, anytime we could walk into that house and the priest would say, go do what you want, take as many pictures as you want, and so on. So it was a big unlearning and learning for me. I hadn't realized this, why I was not allowed into certain homes right in.
Fascinating.
I'm also guessing each one of these houses have some legends in them, part of their oral history. Could you tell us about one or two?
Yeah, these stories that some of them they don't share normally, like the Savardecker house, for example. They'll never tell you that you don't step on the second step of the house when you enter. But there's a reason why you don't step on that. Because they believe that there were dacoits who had come one day to loot the house. And in those days, funny as it sounds, dacoits would give you advance notice. They would tell you they're coming on such and such a day. And yeah, funny you know. And they would tell you, and then they would say, leave whatever you want for us, and and so on. So you did that to save the house from, or the women and children from being killed or harmed in some way. And these dacoits had come without warning, without advance notice. So you could shoot at them if they came without advance notice. And as they came apparently on horseback, they saw a lady sitting on that second step, open hair, fully bejeweled, beautiful 9-yard sari, bare feet and anklets and toe rings. And they believed it was the mother Shanta Durga. And they left. So that second step is considered very, very sacred. And nobody said, even we were told, don't step on that, step over that. So these stories you get to know only when you meet them a couple of times and they start sharing things with you.
I think going back to the burglars giving you a warning, the Antao house had something important to share about burglars. Could you tell us? Yeah.
There's an Antao house in Betalbati, and they were also given a warning. So what they did was they kept something for the dacoits to take, but the jewelry, whatever, they said that, the dacoits didn't realize that most of our wealth is in land. How would what would we give them? But whatever jewelry we had, we buried in the courtyard. And then we put a mirror over the courtyard because we said we ourselves won't be able to find the ornaments after.
Thank you, Heta. We also have with here Daniel Dsouza, who was photographing the entire book. Daniel also comes with a history of documenting Goan festivals like the Shigmo, and he's progressed on to photographing the book. I would like Daniel to share a few insights on working on the book.
Because I think we all agree that, you know, without photography, a book or of any kind, or even a newspaper article, a good photograph enhances, and we are surrounded by these absolutely stunning pictures today. Yeah.
I think photographing stories from Goan Houses was a great experience. I've lived in Goa for 24 years and I got to see a completely different side of Goa and see Goa through a completely different lens and meet so many new people and make so many new friends. Great experience, all in all. Thank you, Heta.